milk still has one of the highest proteins per 100 ml of any liquid. The food you eat is almost more important than your fitness. That's what's going into your body, and food is something I'm really passionate about in terms of it being clean, not only for myself, but obviously also for my children. At the end of the day, though, the packaging is the appetizer. Get someone to trial your product. The taste and the quality have to be there for it to be a repeat purchase.
When people say that, an adult is not designed to drink milk after 30, 35, I don't know. Please tell us about this claim that we hear or read on internet.
Those thousands of mothers who I had been talking to who knew me personally, they're like, I know this guy, Koita. I met him at this coffee morning, and they ended up being part of our community.
You had to go through a lot of struggles. There have been COVID, there have been supply chain shocks, there have been Iran-US war. So it seems like you are a wartime CEO.
Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari.
Hi, I'm Akhil.
And today on ShelfLife, we are joined by Mustafa Koita, founder and CEO of Koita Foods. Mustafa's story is not the usual CPG founder story. Before milk, supermarkets, moms, kids, lunch boxes, and retail shelves, he was building across technology, product, cybersecurity, government markets, and large-scale international sales. Then Koita happened. What started as a personal search for better milk for his own family became a clean label food brand built around a simple but powerful idea. Healthy should be easy. Koita now plays across organic dairy, lactose-free dairy, and plant-based milks with a brand promise that is rooted in family, quality, and fewer compromises. That makes Mustafa's vantage point especially interesting right now because every CPG founder talks about consumer obsession, clean label, resilience, AI, and doing more with less. But Mustafa has lived all of it. Welcome to ShelfLife, Mustafa.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Mustafa, your career before Koita was in tech, product, cybersecurity, and international business, as I just introduced you. Then suddenly you are building a milk brand, which is a multinational brand, by the way. So when you look back now, what actually carried over, from that world to the CPG? Please tell us about whatever you learned in CPG, whatever you brought from your previous world.
Sure. Well, in terms of my previous job, I didn't have a lot of CPG experience. I actually was in the defense business before I got into milk. So some would say almost the opposite of the milk business. But I was in defense for over a decade and a half. It was a great career. Got to see and do a lot of very interesting things. But it's that career that brought me from, as you can tell from my accent, I'm American. I moved from New York City to London, and then from London to the Middle East. And throughout that career, I just learned about how the Middle East operates, who the movers and shakers are, and some of the geopolitical issues in the region. However, at the same time, I was also a parent. My first child was born in London, and my other two were born in the UAE. And as a personal experience, being an expat in the UAE, in the Middle East, I realized how important healthy foods were. And I think that personal experience was actually more relevant when I started Koita Foods. And then a lot of it I just learned on the job.
Would you say the UAE has the healthiest food among all these three regions?
Well, I think the UAE has some of the highest standards for food in the region, to be quite honest. I mean, I think if you talked a long time ago, a lot of the standards bodies weren't in place, and the government's done like a really good job. And I think in some areas, the government regulation is, if not as strict as the EU, sometimes stricter. And so I think the UAE has done a great job in ensuring very high food quality. Our milk products get double, triple checked all throughout the entire supply chain and delivery process. So it's pretty strict over here in terms of food quality.
Yeah. Mustafa, tell us, give us a quick background. So there's one thing you just mentioned that you started from a security from tech world towards CPG. Can you tell us more about you, about who you are, some background about yourself, where you were born?
Yeah, sure. I'll give you the personal, let's call it Mustafa 101. I'll do maybe a few minutes on that. But look, I'm actually Indian origin. My father is Gujarati. He moved to the US, I think in the 60s, late 60s. And so I was born in New Jersey, and I'm what you call a coconut. So I'm brown on the outside and white on the inside, and so grew up in the U.S. as in kind of a middle class, upper middle class family outside of Chicago. Went to high school there, went to a state school, and then I'd say early on in my career, actually my first jobs were in tech sales, and then tech product management, and did a lot of startups and stuff like that. So my career path was, at the time that the dot-com bubble was happening, so a lot of people my age were getting jobs in tech companies, and that was sort of the foundation of. I learned a lot. Those are, I guess, my formidable professional years, and I think something that carried over from that tech sort of startup environment is I believed in very flat organizations. The CEO is usually just 1 or 2 degrees max removed from all the employees. I learned that you had to be agile, and I learned that it was okay to pivot. Your business plan. So a lot of the tech startup stuff kind of rolled its way into what I'm doing now. And on the personal side, just like every entrepreneur or founder, I dealt with a lot of adversity as a kid. I wouldn't say I had the easiest childhood. And I think also in becoming an entrepreneur or any type of CPG executive at the top, you got to learn persistence. And I learned a lot of my persistence through some of my personal experiences, albeit most of the challenges as well.
Tell us more about these personal challenges. What shaped the belief system? What shaped this persistent? Because that's what matters. That's what drives you through all those tough times you
Yeah.
said.
Yeah, sure. Look, I mean, as a Indian origin kid, my parents were kind of on the track where, and you may relate to this, an Indian father's dream is you become an engineer or a doctor, and take that sort of path, go to a great school. And, certainly I think my parents' education was like priority number one. And so for my early years in life, I had very, very good grades. Unfortunately, in my personal life, when I was 13, my mother passed away at a very young age. I would say it was pretty traumatic for me. It happened in front of me. So as a 13-year-old, anytime to witness your mom passing away in front of you is very traumatic. And unfortunately, my grades just took a nosedive. And what happened was my peers, through their experience, they were getting good grades, applying for good Ivy League schools, most of them getting into the MITs and Cornells and things like that. And I literally at the time, because I was quite distraught with my family situation, I barely graduated high school. I had like a 2.0 GPA, which to an Indian parent is like, what's wrong with this kid? I got into Northern Illinois University through something called the Chance program, which basically says if we let you in, we'll give you 1 semester, I think 2 semesters, and if you don't get like a B or higher, you're out of college. And I think that is when I felt, the first turning point in my life, because I'd been in a really, really challenging situation. And now, through peer pressure, seeing my friends going to good colleges, I was barely getting to college. And I think that was the moment where, kind of the fire like lit up in me and said, hey, I need to really catch up, to my peers. And so to answer your question, I learned persistence, through that experience. I learned that no matter what, cards you're dealt, if you really want something, you have to really, really try hard and keep going at it, even if the odds are against you. And I think that moment and then I was quite successful in college, like through extracurricular activities. I started my own fraternity. I got into student government. I was the first guy to apply for internships. I started hustling, a lot. And I think that persistence out of necessity, because I'm trying to survive and keep up with my friends, basically, and my peers, that's something that has helped me become a successful entrepreneur.
I also personally
Right.
feel there's some things that happen during childhood or that persistent stories. That's what keeps us driving. And you have a tough one. I don't wish people have a this tough a childhood, but it's very tough to lose a parent as a kid. I'm sorry about that, but
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. Now I'll just switch gears a little bit. So lot of people think that founder stories begins with a market gap. And you mentioned somewhat that Koita food happened because you saw your kids struggling with milk. Can you tell us more? When did you feel that it should exist? And kids might be struggling with many things. Why just milk?
Yeah. Well, a couple things there. Number one, uh, I did see a market gap through my own personal experience. Like, my daughter Serena had an issue with drinking regular milk. She'd just kind of break out and stuff like that and had some weird symptoms. My son was lactose intolerant, and the regular lactose-free milks either weren't available or weren't working for him. And then my youngest daughter just couldn't drink milk. And so essentially, I kind of found gaps in the market for each of my kids. And I joke saying, and I have like one line for each kid. I think if I had a fourth child, I'd probably have a fourth range of milk, right now. So I saw a personal gap through my personal experiences. But the kind of overarching issue is that when I left my professional career and jumped into the food business, one of the reasons I did that is I was personally also very unhealthy at the time. I wasn't eating well, I wasn't working out, things like that. But I realized that the food you eat is almost more important than your fitness. Like that's what's going into your body. And I think that's when the light bulb went off that food is something I'm really passionate about in terms of it being clean, not only for myself, but obviously also for my children. And I realized that, high quality food, creating the highest quality food is one thing, but it's also the volume of food that you eat that has an impact. So what I realized in the food business is that milks and meats were the foods that you, as a child, you consume the most. There's a lot of, at least in my house, we big dairy house, big milk house. So I chose something that also had enough velocity so that if I had a healthy type of food, it would also have impact. On the commercial side, something that made me choose milk is that I used to go to all the food shows in the beginning when I was trying to figure out what area I wanted to go, and I couldn't afford a lot of the research reports, like these Gartner reports or, paying for these big studies. I didn't have the money. And so I would call it a little bit of street smart analytics, to figure out what industry I went to. And I remember going to Expo East, which was in LA, Expo West, I'm sorry. And there was a gentleman in the milk business at a big US milk company who said, "Hey, Mustafa, if you want to get into this, you should come to Expo West and allow you to learn, what's kind of going on in the industry." And I was trying to figure out what to launch, and I noticed that the guys with the milk booths and the meat booths had the biggest booths, and they had the biggest parties. And the guy with like maybe the organic tea wasn't so big, and I kind of quickly realized that a consumer buys a box of tea once a month. They buy milk on a daily basis, right? So I just could tell that there was a lot of money here because they were spending a lot, and I just figured that's another data point on where the market's at. If the milk guys have got the biggest boots at the show. So there was a combination of things that made me get into milk. I think it's both personal and a little bit of commercial intuition.
Interesting. So these are personal, and you mentioned it's about velocity. You wanted to pick a product which had high velocity. Can you just talk about this point, that products with velocity, uh, why it matters? With velocity, your margins also shrink down. Sometimes the products which have lower velocity, the margins increase, whereas the product which will have high velocity, the margins decrease to some extent, like luxury
Sure.
goods.
Yeah,
So,
you're absolutely correct. Usually, higher velocity in the FMCG space is lower margins, but you've got volume to make up. So your contribution nets out to be quite hopefully healthy in anyone's case. You're right. Lower velocity, you have to charge, especially if you want to scale across multiple geographies. You have to have a higher margin to be able to rest on to also make up for that amount of maximum contribution. I had a slightly different take on it. For me, we've never believed that we're just selling milk. We feel like we're in the business of selling health. And I felt that I wanted to have impact, on people. And so for me to have impact, I also wanted a product that they were consuming daily so I could deliver that health on a more frequent basis and with higher volume, more impact on the person. And so that's another reason. I mean, that's part of my why is I want to have health impact on the populations around us. And so that was a second kind of non-commercial reason I picked milk as well. And that coupled with the fact that my kids needed some clean, good milk.
would you like to show some over here on the podcast if you have nearby accessible?
What's that?
The SKUs, different SKUs
Yeah,
which you
yeah.
have.
I've got a
So
few.
what?
So this is kind of this is the first product that we launched. It was organic milk. As you can tell, we did a lot of proprietary primary research and realized that it was designed for kids. And so the packaging kind of speaks to the number one application, which is children, you know. And so it had kind of a fun, look. And I felt like when I was walking down the milk aisle, it was also kind of hard to understand. So I also wanted to just make it very simple and clear, like, here's the brand name, Koita. Here's what it is, organic, and it's cow milk. And then we literally have just two USPs, hormone free and added vitamins. So we try to keep it simple and understandable. Here's our plant milks, by the way. So we also realized from our plant milk space, we wanted to keep it simple. Like it's almond. We have a philosophy on the plant milk side to have less ingredients and no added sugar across all our plant milks. So you can see it's kind of inverse on the video, but it says no added sugar. And then the number one application for plant milks is coffee, home barista, whatever. So we put froth, pour, or blend. People put it in shake. So we just try to keep it simple. I don't have it with me, but lactose free is another product range that's really big for us, and it just literally says lactose-free dairy with the cow. It looks kind of like the organic. So that's kind of, as you can tell from our product range, we try and keep it simple, a little bit, I'd say, approachable and fun.
Kids, when moms are serving the milk to the kids or they're giving, they could show them the package because a buyer typically would be a mom, and kids may just want to see that. What's the philosophy behind designing these packets, or what's the philosophy behind the design?
Look, I think the philosophy around the design is to be a design that one builds trust, is approachable, and talks about kind of exudes our values. And our values are, quality, clean. We want clean label. We're like a clean label brand, and I think honesty. And so that's what I felt. It's sometimes, especially in images, it's somewhat subjective, but we put a lot of these designs in front of people. And frankly, the biggest thing that we did is Serena, my eldest daughter, is the one who helped me design the pack. So I used my customer to help me design, my potential target customer helped me design. I was like, what would you feel like? And so she gets rights when at some point on the company, but we used our target market to help design the packaging.
Would they be the buyer or the moms the buyer? The customer
So
typically would be the moms, right?
yeah, I feel that's a good point. You're right. Going through the aisle, it's the mom that usually makes the final purchasing decision, but they're heavily influenced by the kids, And so, look, I have three kids. Obviously, when you put something in front of them, they tend to gravitate towards some or another. And a lot of times, moms and kids are walking through the aisle, and the child will walk past and see this versus a traditional milk pack, and they'll just grab it, because they like the way it looks. And so I think it's a combination of both. I bought tons of things for my kids, and they don't buy it, and I've bought tons of things that I didn't think they'd like, and the packaging sometimes help. At the end of the day, though, the packaging is the appetizer. It gets someone to trial your product. The taste and the quality have to be there for it to be a repeat purchase, and so that's kind of how I look at packaging right now.
So, Mustafa, tell us that you described Koita's philosophy as power of subtraction. Can you just talk more about it, where everyone wants to add more claims or more noise gets added? What does this mean, power of subtraction?
Yeah, I think basically we have a value, one of our company values, which is less is more, right? And I think not only does it apply in how we do things, as a SME that's trying to scale, we don't have as many resources sometimes like the big guys, so we have to be creative. We use artificial intelligence. We look at non-traditional, think outside of the box ways of just getting stuff done. We use technology a lot. That's part one, unless there's more. But really, I think where it's important is in the product ingredients. And so we've always been all about less ingredients, and I think also less messaging on whether it's the pack or the marketing, because people are just bombarded by, so many messages all the time. And so we just try and keep it simple. And I think it's probably my philosophy and how I look at things, and that's why that's where less is more comes from.
So, Mustafa, when you were launching this milk, how did you get the first few customers? Tell us the early days story, because milk is a very crowded category. It's a very established category. How do you get your first early customers? What goes in getting the early trials and that insight? You said you could not afford the Gartner research reports, but you did more
Yeah.
primary research by yourself, hacked the way around. What does these, when everyone is reading the same reports, everyone has the same insight. But in order to build a business, you need something unique. What were
Yeah.
those unique elements? What are those unique
So
insights?
So early on, we did something very interesting that I think was one of the secrets of our success in the early days. So proprietary primary research is like, the best type of research, getting on the ground, talking to customers, asking them the right non-yes or no questions, to really understand consumer insights. And so basically one thing that we did, and one of my friends who is a social media influencer, her name is Edwina Veal. She's like, hey, Mustafa, why don't you do some coffee mornings with moms? And I'm like, what is that all about? She's like, sponsor a coffee. We didn't have a lot of money. So she's like, get 10, mothers in a room, buy them all coffee at a nice coffee shop. Let's spend an hour, talk to them. You give your introduction of what you're trying to do, share with them some of the mock-ups or product samples, and then ask them, what do they think? Like literally, how, simple is that, right? And so what we ended up doing is doing 10 coffee mornings with moms. And so if there was 10 people at everyone, we hit like 100 people. And then it worked so well, we ended up doing 10, 10 every single month until we hit like thousands of mothers, right? And what was happening is at these coffee mornings, it was me with, at the time there was only a few of us, all my employees, and we'd sit there and we'd listen and we'd learn things. Like, for example, this is like 9, 10 years ago. They're like, look, we love organic milk, but we need vitamin D. That's really important. We love organic milk, but high fat content is really important. I want a whole fat. There's no whole fat. We want paper packaging, not plastic. If it's going to be UHT milk, shelf stable, it doesn't taste well. What can you do about the taste? Fresh milk being flown in costs too much, because of air freight. So we learned all these little golden nuggets of pain points with the consumer through this proprietary primary research. And that's really what was the requirements document for our first two SKUs that we launched. Now, the flip side is then when we did launch, we didn't have a large marketing budget. And so when we put the product on the shelf, our buyers at the retailers are like, what's your marketing budget? And we'd be like, look, we're on Facebook. And back then they're like, what's Facebook? You know what I mean? So it was just the early days were just so interesting. Now, what happened is when the stuff went on the shelf, the product just sold out. Why did it sell out? Well, number one, we asked all the right questions for what the pain points were. But more importantly, those thousands of mothers who I had been talking to who knew me personally, they're like, I know this guy, Koita. I met him at this coffee morning, and they ended up being part of our community. And they just started buying the product in huge amounts that we just started selling out instantly. And that was sort of an interesting way of doing less with more, or the power of subtraction, which ended up being power of multiplication. It just really, really helped us out a lot.
Interesting. And what was the reason why these moms were coming? When you said coffee with morning coffee with moms or coffee with moms, what were the incentive for the moms to come?
Look, I think one, a lot of the moms were just fascinated with the fact that they were being invited to an entrepreneur who's trying to start something. That's and seeking their input. A lot of people love to share their opinion. And they're sometimes undervalued. People don't listen. Big brand. When do you hear of a big brand going, "Hey, I want to listen to these 10 moms what they have to say," and the CEO's there, right? That never happens. So I think part of it was they probably felt nice to be listened to, right? Because consumers don't feel like they're listened to sometimes. I think two, it's always nice to hear an entrepreneur's story, right? And three, they wanted to learn, and so like I wanted to share with them what I've learned as a parent, what I learned in the milk business and where the gaps were and what I'm trying to do for my kids. I think those were, and then hey, last but not least, they get a free coffee. It's only an hour. You know, how bad can that be? And look, I did ask, you know, these are 10 of my friends. So they asked their friends. So obviously it was someone reputable. It wasn't like they were filling out some online form and it was a no-name company. It was like, you know, 2, 3 degrees of separation max, you know, for these people. I think those are the factors.
So you spread the word by texting people or emailing people or one of these mechanisms to reach to your first early
Yeah.
customer.
Yeah, it was pretty grassroots guerrilla marketing research, I guess what you could call it.
Yeah. And do you still do that at this scale of Koita?
Yeah, I still do. We do it even now that we're in 9 countries. I did it in Saudi Arabia just last year with a bunch of mothers in different areas in Jeddah and in Dammam and Riyadh. It was really fascinating. And we learned some really cool things. We do it in the UAE constantly for NPD ideas. You know, not everyone has the luxury of doing it, but I still find it a gold mine of information and golden nuggets. You really learn. And like you said earlier in your question, you know, everyone sees the same research. The key is how do you find that information that not everyone can see? And some of that is proprietary primary research, some of it is intuition and gut, you know, and some of it's the regular data as well.
Interesting. And you said that you do it, one is for NPD, and you have also been doing similar things for existing products in Jeddah and other parts of Saudi Arabia. Tell us
Yeah.
more. At this scale of company, when you are a decently established company, tell us your journey in Saudi Arabia. What was that launch moment, or how did you do those research? How did you invite those moms?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've been primarily in the UAE and some of the GCC. We've been selling into Saudi Arabia for many years, but not with a distributor, you know, that would allow us to scale. And so before we switched to a distributor, we did some proprietary research and we met a lot of folks and we realized that every country is a little different. You know, there's similarities for sure in the region, but every country has certain nuances to the population at the stage that they're in terms of adopting healthy products. Some countries are happening faster, some countries are happening a little bit slower. You know, you know, everyone's going down the highway, slightly different lanes and at slightly different speeds, basically. And so you learn a lot of different things when you have those coffee mornings with moms. And our head of marketing, her name is Marixie Romero. She arranged it through some of her, she used to live in Saudi Arabia, so she arranged it through some of her connections, some of my connections. And we just got out there. We learned so much about what the market's looking for in Saudi. And it was almost the same playbook that we replicated in the UAE in Saudi. And it was very valuable to us.
Interesting. And tell us something unique nuggets you got, and if those are fine to share, during your coffee meetings in Saudi. Because
Yeah.
what changed in last 10 years, it was around you need vitamin in milk, you need packaging, not plastic packaging, you needed a
Yeah.
better. What changed in 10 years or 12 years
Well,
since then?
I think we saw actually a lot of similarities, to be quite honest. But we saw it at a different stage, adoption stage, I think was too. But a lot of people were like, I want to be able to trust this milk. And that was a really strong word that came up a lot of times. You know, a lot of mothers are concerned about what's in the milk. And so, you know, I think like being hormone free, antibiotic free, pesticide free, those are things that resonated in a big way. And so those are some of the insights that we learned. I wasn't like too surprised by the insights, but there were a few golden nuggets here and there that we took that information and we're like, okay, let's highlight this in our communication.
Interesting. That's the unique thing about founders use, that they are able to go to ground, still drive those guerrilla marketing, and that's interesting. So, Mustafa,
Yeah.
let's say you mentioned that it's a premium brand. Koita Food, it's a premium brand. It's about trust, and brand is a unique asset generally. When
Yeah.
products gets commoditized, it's the brands that starts winning. We look at the globally the largest brands. It's always a brand, like whether it's a phone. Okay, phone still can have technical advantages, but let's say a handbag. Some of the large companies are like have a brand power. You also have built a brand power over a period of time.
Yeah.
What takes away, what's your winning edge against those established players, Or let's say if someone established player, larger milk company wants to enter in your domain, what is it that's different for them, or what's challenging for them? What's unique
Sure.
about it? Or let's say if I have to say in software parlance, we call it the word right to win. What's your right to win against a competitor in a deal? What's your when customers are either walking via the aisle or whether in some other way, a larger milk company comes and wants to compete with you, or how do you compete against them?
Yeah. Look, I mean, in the beginning, we were kind of first to market with this healthy premium category of milk, with this ranges of milk. So I think number one is agility, is the number one asset that any SME has versus a large, I have multi-billion dollar brands that I'm competing with. So agility is certainly one that's important. Two is that, we're able to listen and productize, again, in a faster way than some of the larger players. I think three, our brand is communicates with our consumer in a very different way. We've really taken on digital, and the brand can speak and listen to the customer, I think, in a very unique way. I think our procurement playbook and how we source, quality check, and launch, that playbook, and even supply chain and demand planning, also in the region, there's a lot of, I call it IP, and how you get the product from point A to point B, and working with the right distributors and how you manage them is also a unique capability. But I think, look, some of the important, let's call it IP. I know we're not a tech company, is in how we position, and our recipes are all clean label, premium sourced, and how we communicate to the customer are all really, really important. Look, the brand following is very strong. We do anywhere between 250,000 to 350,000 pack impressions a month in the UAE, and so our brand is really, really well known, and we kind of have a trust that we've built with that consumer segment. And we're also one of the only homegrown brands, that you could say, hey, the founder is right here. I know him. That builds a lot of trust. And I think you've seen that trend in the West. In the U.S., all of the companies that were kind of up and coming were all homegrown brands, and they eventually grew into bigger brands or were acquired by big companies. And the reason is because they've got kind of this unique offering, which is a recipe of a lot of the things that I just described in the last few minutes.
What does the word pack impression means?
Oh, like how many consumptions? Like, 250,000 of these
Ah,
consumptions per month.
okay.
Yeah. Or packs sold, packs used.
Got it. So let's look from a customer lens. When a customer is walking down the aisle and they look at Koita or one of the other milk, which would be the nearest, I don't want you to name anything, but let's say nearest alternative milk product. What's the decision? Who is your customer base? Can you describe them a little bit more in detail?
Yeah.
What
Look,
does the persona looks like, and what makes them pick Koita compared to the nearest alternative?
sure. So look, we've got a consumer that's health conscious. That's to them, health is an important aspect of their life. They're not necessarily price conscious. They're not going to pick the cheapest milk. They're going to pick what's the best milk. We target families, so usually the moms are choosing the decision part of the decision making process, as you guys asked earlier. I think someone who's really concerned about ingredients, like how many ingredients are in the product. Someone who wants to avoid sugar, doesn't want hormones. All those kinds of things. They're the person who will look at the pack and then they'll pick up and look at the side of the pack. That's another description of the person. And I feel like that's kind of that was how I describe that consumer. And then why do they pick Koita? Well, I think homegrown brands are trusted because there's a personal touch to them. We are a clean label brand. And I think also someone who doesn't have time to like when I would walk down the milk aisle, I would just get confused. There's so many different messages, so many different types of packaging. Again, what I like about our branding is the brand, there's one stripe, which really just in one word describes what it is in there, and like two USPs underneath. So it's also easy to understand. So we wanted to make the packaging very approachable, and I think that's something that our consumers appreciate.
Mustafa, on the procurement side, you went to different countries to find the best milk for your product. I think you went to Australia, US, Europe, and you finally decided on Italy. So can you tell us about that story also? How
Yeah.
why
Look,
and how did you reach Italy?
yeah, look, I think at the time, a decade ago, I think Europe had very stringent government regulations in terms of, how they take care of the cows and the quality standards for example, the certifications that we had. We have an organic line that had a very strict organic certification process. And then for UHT shelf stable milk, the Europeans had a lot of experience in that process and making sure that the product was of the highest quality, the product had a good taste, and that all the supply chain quality standards were built in. And so those are some of the reasons that we picked Europe. By the way, I mean, we're in the Middle East, so shipping milk from the U.S. Is a little bit harder from America to Europe. So obviously Europe is close by as well. That was a big calculus in the decision making. So those are some of the reasons why we chose the Europe.
Got it. And are you facing any supply chain shock nowadays because of the ongoing
Yeah.
conflict in the Middle
So,
East? What's the
yeah,
situation?
as you know, the Straits of Hormuz have been closed now for almost 6 weeks. It's been difficult, I have to say. I mean, what we realized is that, because in the look, we sell into like 10, 11 countries. So not all the countries were impacted, but certainly the ones that were um, rely on shipping containers going through the Straits of Hormuz. And so that has been difficult. And so I think what's happened over the last 6 to 8 weeks is one, the government here has been pretty supportive, in terms of supporting, the food business and allowing, business leaders like myself to interface directly with government leadership to help them keep abreast of like what's going on and where we need some guidance and whatnot. But now what's happened is, luckily at this moment there's a ceasefire, so things have kind of calmed down, and so some of the other ports have opened up. So for example, Oman, Corfacon, some of these other ports, besides Jebel Ali, which is the big port in the UAE, one of the big ports in the UAE, and so products are coming in through there. And we all hope, things resolve itself and open up eventually. But in the temporary time period, if you'd asked me 3 or 4 weeks ago, I think I was a little bit more worried. But now I feel like the logistics infrastructure is adapting to kind of this new, let's call it wartime slash ceasefire environment. And it's made it a lot easier for us to bring in supply. And frankly, we were out of stock for a while, so that was really difficult. But we finally got our stocks in, and things are sort of adapting to this new environment.
Got it. Uh, Also, Mustafa, you against plant-based challengers, you have advantage of understanding dairy households and retail market behavior. So, how do you develop that in the first place so that you have a, let's say, wedge against the challengers, because that's the third arm of your operations.
On the plant-based side, you're
Yeah.
saying? Yeah, look, I think the two biggest things that we did is one is we looked at less ingredients. We saw that there was a lot of plant-based milk solutions with tons of ingredients, some things that you couldn't even pronounce or understand. And two, sugar was a big thing. So again, we have a no added sugar policy on all of our plant milk. We just don't add sugar, and so that's kind of part of our company values, and ethos, and so that's really how we stand apart. We've got about half the number of ingredients as some of the more mass market brands out there per, for almond, oat, and coconut milks, for example. And again, we have no added sugar, and we don't compromise on that. We'll never add sugar to our products.
That's interesting.
Mustafa, coming back on the business side back again, tell us more. One is what I hear is, and there are some points I would like to talk about. One is it seems like you had to go through a lot of struggles. There have been COVID, there have been supply chain shocks, there have been Iran
Yeah.
US war. So it seems like you are a wartime CEO. So would love to hear your view around it. How do you perceive it, and where? I mean,
Yeah.
what
I, I
what's
I
your
do.
take?
I do perceive myself as a wartime CEO, fortunately or unfortunately. So look, this isn't an easy neighborhood to do business in, especially as you're an SME. You know, you don't have the safety net as some of the big billion-dollar companies sometimes, but you do have the ability to pivot quite quickly. And so, you know, I got to say that every single time, look, we've been through quite a few, let's call it geopolitical shocks. COVID was the first one. Then the Red Sea, you know, had some issues, and that was blocked because, you know, a lot of stuff coming through Europe had to go through the Red Sea, and now it started going around the Cape. The Russia-Ukraine war created a year of massive inflation. And now we have the Straits of Hormuz. So my operations and supply chain person, you know, her and I were just looking at each other last week, and I was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And that's a really loaded question, and we just started laughing after the last 10 years of everything that we've been through. And I'm very lucky to have probably a lot of smarter people than me working for me, and she's done like an amazing job. But all those shocks have had a big impact on all the departments, but obviously supply chain has been a big one. And I think that what's has set us apart is that one, we've been agile, and we take, you know, when you have a shock, you have to make the best of two shitty decisions sometimes. And so I've learned how to make the best of shitty decisions sometimes because you just have to move forward. Two, I've learned that we quickly have to increase the cadence of certain meetings depending on the shock. So for example, now, you know, we used to have a supply chain connect, you know, on what's our goods in transit, what's the demand plan, you know, it would be like a monthly meeting. During the middle of this, it became weekly and then sometimes daily meetings, you know, so we were able to make quick decisions, in terms of what the geopolitical conflict was. But, you know, every time, I think the headline is every time we've had a big shock to the system, it's made us more resilient, you know, and we've found some silver linings in every single challenge. In COVID, we all kind of freaked out, but I don't know if people know this, but we doubled our revenues in 1 year because people shifted from fresh milk to milk that they could store in the pantry, you know, and so and so they quickly were educated on the fact that shelf stable milk can be just as healthy as fresh milk, and that was kind of a perception issue. And so that geopolitical issue, you know, increased adoption of UHT milk, and it was like kind of a blessing in disguise. It also taught us on how to work remotely, you know, so we made sure all of our systems, you know, if we had to work from home, we could, you know, everything is hosted online, we could work from home. In the US, that's quite common. Here, it was a very, let's go into the office, more of a let's go in the office environment. So when the Straits of Hormuz got shut and the war happened, we took a lot from the COVID playbook and applied it to where we are right now, and that's helped us a lot. And like I said, you know, I'm an eternal optimist. I'm full of persistence. So, you know, when these things happen, I look at the opportunities and the silver linings, and then I double down on those and try and, capture them.
Got it. Mustafa, Koita is an omni-channel CPG brand, but its channel architecture varies depending on the market. And you earlier gave, you know, a difference between Saudi and UAE. Uh, can you like dive deeper into, at what stage the Saudi market is right now for you, and at what
Yeah.
stage UAE market is?
Yeah, I would say the UAE, because it has a higher population of expats, and it's just, I think, a bit of a different demographic, tends to adopt a little bit faster some of the trends that I see globally. Not all of them, but some of them. I think in the healthy eating space, it adopted a bit faster than its peers in the region. In Saudi, I would say is, you know, also adopting healthy eating. It's coming in maybe a few years, you know, later, in terms of adoption percentages. The thing about Saudi though is it's got a much larger population, and so it may adopt later, but the scale can be bigger, you know, because in the UAE you've got, let's say, I don't know, for example, I don't quote me on the exact numbers. Let's say you have 10 million in UAE, you've got 30 to 40 million in Saudi. So adoption might be a little bit slower, but the scale is a lot bigger. And so that's a generality, but that's kind of how I see it in terms of our specific sort of category.
Okay, I'll put you in some spot right now. So I used
Yeah,
to live
yeah.
in a way that the traditional means of a culture, uh, are they like unhealthy in the modern times? Are they not eating, let's say, hormoneless? Are they not having hormoneless milk? What are you indicating it when you say that
Yeah,
somebody is
look,
adopting?
yeah, look, let me talk about, look, I think this will address it, but, there's a lot of opportunity for better eating here in the region, and so like, I'll give you an example, lactose intolerance, or lactose intolerance is like, almost, more than one out of every two people has a lactose intolerance issue. Obesity is almost 30 in the mid 30s% of the entire GCC population. Cardiovascular disease, people who die of heart attacks or cardiovascular issues is almost one in three people. Vitamin D deficiencies is almost like in the 70s for the GCC. So you have a huge population that's craving a healthier system. And that can be done at the healthcare, that can be done at, you know,
Household.
culture, like what people do, and it could be, I think, in how you eat. So this healthy eating trend, which hit the U.S. many, many years ago, is now cascading through this region in a big way. And look, it's just a big trend. And yeah, I would say UE is kind of adopting a little bit faster, and the rest of the GCC are coming in. But there are pockets in each of the countries where they're adopting a little bit faster or slower than other pockets.
Got it. Why I ask these questions is because I'm coming to consumer signals. Of course, these
Yeah.
markets are emerging markets, and UAE is, due to the
Yeah.
expat population, is much ahead of the region in the region. But today, when a brand looks at sales, retailer feedback, Instagram comments, WhatsApp messages, sampling feedback, I mean, there are so many signals coming at you. When all of these signals disagree, what do you trust first? Can you give us a story, if it's possible?
Yeah, I trust my sales, you know, because like I'll give you an example. Like we launched a product a while ago. Um, I want to say, look, we made a lot of mistakes in the early days, and I think the best way of launching a product is based on consumer insights,
Please,
consumer
please tell
driven.
us more about these mistakes.
Yeah, yeah, I got a lot of them, man. I got a lot of them. I'm full of mistakes and learnings, but you know, our suppliers were saying, "Hey, Mustafa, you're doing a great job in organic dairy, lactose-free, and plant-based milks. We have cooking cream, and these are large dairies in Europe, and they want to push other dairy products. So we said, okay, let's push cooking cream, and there was a 200 ml and a 1 liter cooking cream, and it was a great product, like just like I'm talking top of the quality spectrum. It wasn't offered here. We had hormone free, which is like a really clean cooking cream. And I didn't really listen to the consumer. I didn't do consumer. This is about 7, 8 years ago. I wasn't like, does the Koita consumer want cooking cream from me? So I launched it because my supplier's like, hey, we'll support it. We'll give you low MOQs. We talked to the farmers and everything, and we just went after it, and it just failed miserably. I had to kill my distributors bought the product. Everyone just, it wasn't a great product. And I think the bad thing is we had a bad product launch, and I think all CPG companies launch products and you have a couple winners, a couple failures, every period that you do this. That was one of our fails. And but the win out of that is I learned that, listen, I'm never launching a product again based on purely supplier driven, insight, because they were thinking it works in this market, but I didn't think about it in my market. So I wish I'd done the coffee mornings with moms and said, hey, we're thinking of launching this cooking cream. Here's the USPs. Here's the price point it's going to come at. Would you buy it? And it just, it didn't work. Now that doesn't mean that we can't come back and launch cooking cream later on. Now that the brand, now the brand is a lot bigger, and maybe the market dynamics are different. But at that time, I wish I'd done the research. And that was a big fail. But the win is, the best learnings are through failures. And so I learned some things through that experience.
Mustafa, can you tell us about the MOQs now? I mean, a ballpark figure with, let's say, the retailers in UAE, if, if it's
Yeah, I
possible.
mean, like, look, in the food business, retailers want to buy by the pack, by the case, and so they don't kind of understand MOQs. In the dairy business, MOQs are high, and so, there's a lot of barriers to entry in launching dairy because your MOQs at the small end are 50,000 liters per production run. You know, the MOQs on Tetra Pak paper, you know, this paper label that you have to create in mass quantities can be 250,000 packs, paper packs per run. And there's lots of setup fees, cost fees. You know, you got to get things, you know, right by the milk is regulated, obviously, so the regulator has to approve the labels. They have to vet the certification. So, you know, MOQs are pretty tough. So, you know, when you're gonna, for example, launch cooking cream, you better know that there's going to be a consumer base that wants to buy it, you know, at the USP. You got to know your addressable market size. You got to do the market SWOT analysis. You got to talk to consumers. You got to talk to the buyers. You got to do all that kind of stuff. And like I said, I think we learned the hard way many years ago that that's really important because you can get killed financially on the high MOQs.
If I have to ask, you mentioned one is consumer insights is a big thing. Can you, one is double click on that? Also, if you have to launch a new product, so this cooking cream was launched because you saw some suppliers saw this as big product in their geography, but it was, and you thought it might be a opportunity area over here in GCC, but it did not consume. I mean, the consumer trends were not there, or consumers were not ready for similar kind of product.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, like, how do you define for a new product when it's via talking to consumers? But if you have to bring back the cooking cream, what does the whole process look like? Or any other product, you will see that
Yeah.
there are gaps in other markets. I mean, there are products existing in other markets which don't exist over here. And how do you bring that? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, look, I think two things are involved in that. One is you have to find a gap in the market that's not being served. I think that's the best way for an SME or a new entrant in any new market, even big companies. You got to find a gap and really double down on that gap and find that white space. Because if you go into a market and there's no gap, I mean, you're just competing with established players and it's a real uphill battle. I think the other thing is that, you know, unless you have a big budget, going into a different category is a lot costlier than a range extension. So for example, I always kind of prefer range extensions. So for example, I'm in lactose-free milk. I'm a market leader in lactose-free milk in certain geographies. And so I'd rather launch a lactose-free chocolate milk or lactose-free in a different size than launch lactose-free cheese, you know, because you also have to realize when you go into a different category, it's not just about your marketing to your consumer. And look, I'm not saying it works in every case. I mean, sometimes you can move into another category, sometimes you can't, but it's usually a lot more costly and a little bit more risky. Also in the stores, you got to realize that when you go into new categories, they're in different aisles of the store, and there's different managers, different merchandisers, different distributors have different strengths in certain aisles versus other aisles. So all those things, you know, distribution is also another aspect of. And at the time when we did cooking cream was in a whole different section of the store. It wasn't placed in most cases right next to where our consumers were coming and buying Koita milk. And so that was a big issue. And that was one of the learnings, you know, that I took away from that.
And what's the cost it takes to launch as an SME brand? What does it take to launch a new product? Let's say at some of these companies, I know it costs up to around $50 million. These are like the large companies of like at the scale of Nestle or Unilever. But what does it
Yeah.
take for an SME to launch? What's the cost you have to incur to launch a new brand, new product?
Look, I mean, I can't give you like a definitive answer because it really depends on a lot of things. I think one, it depends on how different is your product than what's out there. The more of a white space that you're filling, the less costly it is. You know, the larger the addressable market is for that, or your TAM is for that product, the less costly it is if it's a true white space, right? I think the size of your population that you're going after is another thing, right? I think, and I think how much you have to spend or how big you want your growth to be, you know, sampling, marketing, and all that stuff are big levers that can go from like, you know, $100,000 to millions, right? Depending on how big or small. So I don't think you can say it's this, you know, cookie cutter amount. It's really different on the segment, the situation at that time, how big you want to go. But personally, I've always been an advocate of smaller launches because I feel like I'd rather go with more test and learn sort of or experimental sort of way of launching, because I feel like it's better to make less expensive mistakes earlier on, refine your product, refine your message, and then once it works in either one retailer, one geography, one channel, then scale and start spending behind that in other places. So I really like to take baby steps and dip my toe into certain channels, certain segments before I scale. So I've always been an advocate to, and frankly, I think it helps you scale faster, right? If I were to launch a new product and hit all the different channels and hit the whole, go nationwide on day one, I don't really think that's the smartest thing, because you could really fail hard. I'd rather, and that might take you like a year or two. I'd rather do 3 months in one state, for example, get it done right, get all the learnings, and then scale into more states or more geographies.
Right. Mustafa, when you say these baby steps, can you know, tell us what are these baby steps? Because one of the things that you believe in is brand building through operational discipline and not just relying on marketing creativity.
Yeah.
So, to a founder who's starting in CPG, what are these baby steps? How can they become operationally better executioners?
Look, I mean, your distribution, start with small distribution and start with the lowest MOQs possible, right? On your paper production recipes so that you can test and learn. And I think if you work with your suppliers to work on the smallest MOQ possible, and you work with your sales people to have the smallest distribution possible for NPDs, I think it's always a good thing, because then you can launch and you can test a multitude of things. Does the taste profile work? Does the packaging communicate what I want to communicate? Is the marketing message working? How are the buyers finding it? Does the price point work? And then if you can, then you do another run and you can make some tweaks here and there. Now, depending on the product range, things with Tetra Pak paper are very costly. You have to really, you minimum, you got 250,000 packs you got to produce in terms of paper, and production runs are high. But, for folks that have, other types of packaging with low MOQs, I would test and learn at a small scale as much as possible, and really get it right before I scale.
And how do you get on the ground? What should be your mindset, and at what point you should be going on ground and talking, just like you had your morning coffees?
Oh, at the beginning stage, I mean, I think as once you conceptualize something with your team, or if it's on your own, it depends on the size of the company or based on your peers, get in front of consumers as soon as possible at every stage. Feel free to be transparent. Don't be ashamed if you don't have your whole business plan sorted out. You just have to be honest and transparent that, hey, I'm in concept stage. What do you think? Hey, I'm in pre-production stage. This is what it's going to look like. It's going to go here. What do you think the marketing should be? Hey, I just produced. I'm about to launch. It's in these stores. What do you think I should? Just be honest with your consumer audience, or your focus group, or what have you. Just tell them what stage you're in. I think people are always excited to be part of something. And it shouldn't scare you at what the stage. You shouldn't be scared of asking dumb questions. I ask them all the time. I'm an expert in dumb questions. And just be curious, and be open-minded. Don't take things personally. I remember when I came up with my first packaging, some people were like, "This thing looks horrible," or "This is so bad." So instead of like taking it personally, I was like, okay, why? Tell me what you do like. What don't you like about it? And just be curious and don't be offended. It's business at the end of the day. So don't take things personal. I think if you have that attitude, sky's the limits.
Interesting. Mustafa, you also touched about consumer insights. Can you talk a little more about that? How do you run consumer insights function today? Where does it sit? Or how a CPG company, or like Koita Foods, operates overall?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of consumer insights, it depends on your resources available, how much time you have before you make a decision. I'd say, we're a bit more scrappy in the early days. So our consumer insights were online forums. Again, like I said, coffee mornings with moms. Sometimes talking to buyers who own the category. I'd go to retailer buyers for some of the biggest retailers, and they have so much experience. I'd say, hey, what's working in your category? What's not? what are the consumers asking for? So buyers are a really great source of an aggregator of consumer insights. Sometimes going to the store managers and talking to the aisle managers. There's a lot, and then obviously you can buy the reports. But you can only get so much from a report. You can see kind of high level big data, but the real nuggets I've found that have really helped us grow have been those consumer insights through kind of non-traditional methods. I call it guerrilla insights, instead of guerrilla marketing. And right now our marketing department kind of runs that, and we have, our marketing person is she's done a great job getting us consumer insights with sometimes limited resources, and sometimes she does have resources to do it in different ways.
Nice. Mustafa, your entire team looks pretty close to the ground. You're also talking to people directly. So give us what's a typical day for Mustafa Koita. Is how do you
Oh man,
start?
there's no typical day. There's no, especially, I mean, as your viewers are watching as of today, we're in the middle of a war slash ceasefire. So I can just tell you the last 6 weeks there's been nothing typical. But typical, we do look. It's a combination of being close to the customer, being close to your distributors, and being close to your people internally. And the key functions are always like listening to consumer insights, and then managing your supply chain has been sort of top of mind recently. But there's I'm an emerging market. There's a lot of things happening in the region. I'm an SME that's scaling. So there's no typical, unfortunately, no typical day. But we have, daily huddles with our team. So at the beginning of every day, we take 6 minutes, and every team leader highlights to us what's their number one priority, what's their daily KPI, and what's their biggest challenge, and then we break. And we have weekly huddles where every week we get together and talk about patterns we've seen from the dailies, and then we talk about all the main business functions. And then we have a monthly with the entire company staff where everybody gets aligned on, kind of what the direction is of the company. And we're always kind of striving for a unified vision, which is to help families become healthier. And that's kind of the driving, let's call it the North Star for our company.
And how is moving into CPG from cybersecurity, shaped your vision? Because I believe you're much more closer to a family now, because what you create is directly consumed by a family. So how has it changed you as a father?
Um, Look, I mean, I was in the defense business, so I would just say personally, I was traveling, all the time. Um, I don't think my kids could really relate, to what I was doing. They heard about it at dinner conference. They were younger at the time too. And now Serena, she's 20 years old. She's at NYU right now, and so she's had internships at food companies. So now, and so just in general, Serena, Danielle, and Sophia, they can just relate more to what I do because they consume our products, and so when I talk about work, they kind of get it. I'm like, hey, I'm thinking about changing this on the packaging, or we're thinking of do. So food is just a lot more relatable, and so I think it's helped my relationship with my. Well, there's a double-edged sword. It's helped my relationship with my kids because they get it, but just being an entrepreneur is also pretty taxing. There's no matter what any entrepreneur says, there's not a lot of work-life balance in the early years, and so it has, I do wish I could spend more time with my kids, but that has been a challenge, but they can relate a little bit more to work, and that makes me really proud, and they're proud to see their family name in the stores and the friends consuming it and reading about it in the news and stuff like that. So that is a little bit, I would say net, it's helped my relationship with my kids. And they certainly share their opinions with me about everything about the brand, Serena, Danielle, and Sophia, all of them.
Do you also have presence in US, or is it just
I
GCC?
No, it's mainly just the GCC in Asia. We did launch in the US a long time ago, and then we pulled out. This is about 6 years ago. And I think another failure that I had as an early stage entrepreneur is I got into, I call it a bit of a flag planting exercise. I just wanted to be in all the countries, and being an American, it would make me so proud to have my milk in all the aisles of stores where, my ex-girlfriend shopped, and so that was part of a little bit of an ego-driven decision many, many years ago. But, all jokes aside, I think the big learning is that you got to focus. Like it was easy to get into the U.S. and not easy, but we got into the U.S. We were in like 300 plus stores. But what I realized is that the whole company was here, halfway across the world, right? And focus is really, really important, right? You can't, if you really want to do it right, do it in one country first and then go to the next country. And with limited resources, just getting on the shelf is one thing, but really touching, understanding the consumer base, driving sell through, that's a big learning. And so again, I learned through my failures that focus is important. Then when we pulled out and started refocusing on our home market, we saw a clear positive impact on our balance sheet and our revenues. And so I think that was a big learning. So to answer your question, yes, we were in the U.S. 6-7 years ago. Luckily we pulled the plug on that. And as we scale, I can't say that maybe in the future we might not, but we need to get the job done in each market first before expanding, and that's something that we've quickly learned is important.
Interesting. And how do you know your brand is doing healthy? So you've been Koita around clean labels, family trust, everyday use. When you walk into a business review now, what are the first signals you see whether the brand is healthy? Whether it's repeat purchase, household penetration, retailer pull, complaint patterns, velocity, or something else which is harder to quantify?
Well, Akil, I think you answered your own question because I would just repeat all of the elements. It's a combination of, all the elements that actually you just rightfully brought up. I think sales, repeat sales, is important. Penetration per store, I think at the store level even is really important. Shows it's a big important signal of a healthy brand. I think those are kind of the key fundamentals that we look at. Obviously, consumer comments, that we see online or that are sent to us through email, are really important. Ensuring that they're having good consumer experiences every time they pick up a pack of Koita. So there are some soft elements that are harder to quantify, but I think repeat sales are a key factor.
Interesting.
Right. Mustafa, so this segment of the podcast is, about what people are asking, on internet about your brand. So
Yeah.
one question that we could see is about UHT, ultra high temperature milk,
Sure.
processed milk. So can you tell us about, why people are looking for it and why do you use it?
Yeah, so UHT, there's a lot of information about that. But let me give you a little bit of Milk 101, and I'm not gonna say it as an engineer, but I'll do a high level version of it. Basically, fresh milk that you see in the aisle isn't technically fresh milk. I define it as short life milk, and it lasts usually 5 to 7 days. Long life milk lasts sometimes 6 months to a year, depending on the process. And what happens with short life milk is you heat it up, you cool it down, and then it goes into a plastic container, which light can go in, and light passes through, and it's not airtight. And because of that, it lasts usually 5 to 7 days. Long life milk, actually, a lot of people don't know this, go through a very similar process. You heat it up a little bit hotter, you cool it down a little bit cooler, but then it goes into an airtight aseptic Tetra Pak in our case, which is a full light barrier, and no air can go in and out. And that's really what allows it to have, its longevity. And the nutritional, if it's done with high quality milk, the nutritional values are the same. The protein is the same, so that's kind of been a misconception. Sometimes it tastes a little bit sweeter because you heat it up a little bit more, so it has a little bit of a sweeter taste, which in some cases could be good. But we quickly learned that UHT milk can retain a lot of the nutritional qualities, just like fresh milk, or let's call it short life milk. And so that's kind of a misconception. Now, traditionally, shelf-stable milk has been like the cheapest milk in the aisle. People are just caught, and it has a lot of stabilizers and, kind of a lot of nasties in it. What we did is we put when we launched organic milk through that same process, so it was very clean to begin with and retained a lot of the high quality standards. And so that's just a little bit of Milk 101 on, let's call it short life milk, aka fresh milk, versus shelf stable milk, which is the category that we play in. And we've realized that in our emerging markets, shelf stable milk has been a lot more logistics, proof, because it has a higher shelf life and doesn't have to be stored in cold store. It can be stored in room temperature until it's used.
Got it. And funnily enough, many questions are about what does Koita mean. So, I
Yeah.
mean, you see the
So
man right
Koita,
now.
so Koita is actually my last name. My name is Mustafa Koita. And the reason I named it Koita, well, so I don't know if you know, but I'm Gujarati Indian, and I think my great great grandfather used to sell fishing knives in Bombay. And so a Koita is like, I think like a blade, like a fish, some sort of fishing knife.
Okay,
So
wow.
I'm not in the knife business, obviously, but I think that's how the name came. And so I asked someone in my family who's a very successful food entrepreneur. He said, "Well, what do you want to do with this business?" And all the CPG professionals that I was talking to before I launched Koita, I was like, "Don't name it your name or anything like personal, because if you need to sell it someday or this and that, you won't take things personally." And then I asked this person who has a successful business. I said, how should I name it? He said, well, what do you want to do with it? He said, do you want to sell it to some, is it like set it up for a couple of years and just sell it to some guy in 3, 4 years? And I said, no, I want to build something. I want to get into the health business. I want to like disrupt the business. I want to do something. A little bit more long term. And he said, put your name on it. I said, why? He's like, because then you'll treat it like it's your own baby. And it's true. So like, my family reputation is on each pack. Like I remember I was in Singapore once and I saw the packs in the aisle and I just started merchandising them on my own because I was like, I don't want it to look bad. And so I treat, every one of these packs like it's a child of mine, and I put a lot of quality into it. Now, and so anyways, that's a little bit of the story, but it's based as if my ego wasn't big enough. I named it after myself. I joke sometimes, but yeah, it's my family name.
Nice. So, I mean, a lot of people can get, the answer to that question.
Yeah, yeah.
One question that people ask you, that grinds your gears, let's say. I mean, you seem like a fairly, calm person, but something that people get wrong about Koita that you have to, correct them all the time. Maybe friends,
I
family, consumers.
I think a lot of people have a misconception of UHT milk, so I'm really glad you asked that question. They're like, it's not fresh, it can't be
Exactly.
healthy, and I'm like, actually, if you know the process, it can be some of the healthiest milk possible. So I think that's maybe one misconception. And so, and it's okay, it happens. And so we have to spend a little bit more time educating the market on the differences. I would say that's probably the main one that we get.
On this, I also did some research about Koita on using AI on Claude, and one of the thing it said was the among three product lines, one is organic dairy, which at least the numbers are not public, but it made some assumptions that it might be 50% of revenue, plant-based 30% of revenue, and lactose-free would be 20% of revenue. That's what AI assumptions are. I don't know how accurate. And it says the potential to grow is very high on plant-based because there is a US market traction. The standalone growth trajectory of plant-based milk is very high. How
Yeah.
accurate is AI over here?
Oh, I'd say it wasn't so accurate, but I'm excited that we came up in an AI prompt. Look, I think in our business, I can give you the latest as of, you know, May 2026. Right now, look, when we launched Plant, there was a lot of interest in Plant. But I'd say in the recent years, we've seen a shift back to dairy. I think consumers have been coming down to less ingredients. Even though we have half the ingredients and no added sugar in our plant-based milk, dairy is like one ingredient plus vitamins, I think protein has been very important, and, milk still has one of the highest proteins per 100 ml of any liquid. Cow milk has very high protein. That's a big thing. And so there's a lot of trends for that, but I think plant had a bit of a spike, and I think now we're seeing a majority of it. We're seeing a lot of growth come back to dairy, and so and in the dairy space, lactose-free is actually one of our biggest ranges. then followed by organic and then plant. And so that's kind of where we see the breakup. And obviously, I see a lot of growth opportunity here in the region. You know, the addressable market size for milk in the GCC is like $2.5 billion, and UHT alone is $1 billion market size. So, and we're just, you know, hitting the tip of the iceberg, and the penetration within those markets for a premium, clean, you know, type of milk is really, really high. And so that excites me. I see a lot of growth in our current markets. I think even with everything happening in the region, you know, we're one of the only players, you know, that is really focused on these segments. And so that's always a really nice opportunity for us to grow.
Interesting. And can I also ask, what does your technology stack looks like? Because technology is an enabler for a business like yours. So what does that look like? How do you use technology? Let's say, I don't want to say if a larger player wants to partner, but let's say, what can some larger companies learn from you or uh, take away from you? Typically, this podcast largely has focused on smaller players. They can learn from you, but let's switch the gears. What can a larger company learn from you? What does your technology stacks look like? What contributes to this agility? And
Yeah,
among various teams, which are like the hardest function on your business?
look, in terms of the technology that we use, you know, look, I think we've also made some mistakes on our technology stack. I mean, number one is everything has to be hosted online or SaaS. So like there's nothing in the company that's sitting on our own server in the office. You know, everything isn't on the cloud. And I think because I'm a tech guy, I've always believed in that. So that's number one. Number two is, you know, we used to have kind of like, I call it SME style ERP systems, you know, and we were using an inventory management system, an accounting system, and then we upgraded to let's call it a big brand ERP system. And I think what we learned the hard way is that we didn't need it, you know, and we got I'd say one of the top brand ERP systems, and it was just too heavy for our company. And so we've realized that, you know, and I take ownership of that mistake. That was on me at the end of the day. Unfortunately, the guy who's running IT sometimes curses me on that. So I think we went a little too overkill on the ERP system. However, where we have seen a big opportunities on the AI front, and coming back to you know, our value of less is more, you know, on the marketing side, our marketing department's doing wonders with how AI is helping them in managing social media, creating posts, you know, things like that. AI is helping me, you know, in some cases, if I have to summarize a meeting or next steps for my team, you know, AI is really helping me articulate some of that stuff, even as a CEO. And so I'm really excited about the future potential of AI. Our finance department is starting to use it. Some of the back office functions. Frankly, everyone is using it right now in the company. I don't think we're fully utilized. I think we need to learn more about it. But I think, especially in the last 6 months, things, you know, the AI capability has gotten more and more intuitive, more easy to use, a lot more capable. And so that's very exciting to me.
I also wanted to understand one of the places what I have seen, or when we interact with a lot of board of CPG companies or the CEOs, one of the places they see AI can drive is a lot of more efficiency. Like how do you do your reporting? How do you do like the lot of analyst work that gets
Sure.
replaced with AI typically? Do you
Yeah.
also use it there, or one is on the marketing, generating creatives, or asking it as a research assistant, but also AI can also be a co-worker that can work with you along side by side.
Yeah. 100%. Look, I mean, the short answer is we're trying to use it in as many places as you can. I think as a CEO and maybe as a big company, there's kind of two thought processes that you have with AI. One is, can you get rid of employees and do the same job with less employees? Or can you have AI and have your current employees have a multiplier effect on productivity? And so, you know, I think in our case, as a growing company, we went with the latter. We're like, look, how can our employees do more? How can we provide more services, more insights, more, you know, data analytics, more sales, you know, with AI? So that's kind of the direction that we've taken, and that's why we've gotten everyone kind of trained up. We bought some site licenses with some of the AI providers and whatnot. Um, but I think to answer your question, how we're committed to it. How we use it, we're still learning right now. We're still in the learning phase. But I've seen amazing opportunity. And again, I think the reason I have to say that is that it's really only in the last 6 months where, some of these AI guys have really shown capabilities that are, just unbelievable. And so I think everyone like me, we're not like, hey, this is how we're using it. We're still sort of testing and learning it.
Interesting.
Got it. So, Mustafa, beyond technology, what's next for Koita? What are the new products or the new markets that you're opening up? What's next?
Yeah, look, I think one, we're just coping with the current geopolitical situation. So we do have a lot of exciting things that we want to do, but right now we're actually looking on supply chain resilience, and that's a big part. I think the whole world has been impacted by supply chain issues. So there's a lot of innovation you can do on your supply chain, and I think that's part one that we're trying to build into the fabric of the company. And I think our last four geopolitical issues has put us in a really good position to do that. I think two, I'm the vision is, again, we're not here to sell milk, we're selling health. And I think that, I've been a specialty functional milk provider for the longest time, lactose-free milk, organic milk, and plant-based milk. So trying to hit all the big four health problems in the region. And I think there's just a lot more that we can do. I'm excited about protein. I'm excited about some functional types of RTD beverages. And so that's kind of what we're looking at right now in terms of the future. And it's super exciting, especially with the markets that we have here in the GCC. Very, very fast growing, and they all are really wanting healthier products like ours.
Got it. And will we ever see you expand into markets that have a bit of challenge in terms of cold chain, infrastructure, or logistics is slow, like India, for example?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm in one right now, right? Obviously, we're in the GCC, which is a very hot
Yeah.
environment, especially 4 months out of the year. We've had a lot of logistics issues, lately. India is an adjacent market, but honestly, I think for the time being, we got the job to be done is here, and we're not even at full penetration in our current markets. So I'd rather go after the low-hanging fruit in our current markets. However, that being said, it doesn't stop us in the long term at looking at other big markets, adjacent markets. I mean, the great thing about Dubai is we're within a few hours flight of, billions of the population, large parts of the population. So that's what I love about being in the UAE is you're adjacent to so many other interesting markets that you can tap into. And I would probably, if I were to scale into another market, it would be an adjacent market. It wouldn't be halfway across the world, at least for the time being.
Wonderful. Uh, Mustafa, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
This was really insightful. Fun. I mean, I learned so much about milk today. Mustafa 101, Milk 101. Like, it's just amazing. I think so many insights to take out from this. Mustafa, last question. Which is your favorite milk? And you can't say all my favorite. Please, you have to give us an
So,
answer. Which one do you drink?
so I use my whole fat. We have 3.7 grams of fat, which is higher fat content than the traditional whole fat milks here. Organic milk. I love mixing it into. I love a bowl of cereal, just like a kid, and I put it in my protein shakes all the time. So it's my organic whole fat. That's my. It doesn't mean I don't love the other ones. I mean the lactose free is the favorite of my son, who's got a lactose intolerance issue. But for me, it's the whole fat milk.
Okay, I would like you to, bust one myth also. When people say that, an adult is not designed to drink milk after 30, 35, I don't know. How, please tell us about this claim that we
Yeah,
hear or read on internet.
yeah. Look, I mean, I'm 51, and so I have to tell you, I've been drinking milk my whole life. I consider myself a pretty healthy 51-year-old. And me and my peers, all my old friends, I guess you could say, have been drinking it. We've never had any real issues. I think the only time I've seen an issue is in this region. There's a lot of lactose intolerance, but my easy answer is then drink my Koita lactose-free milk, and
Lactose free.
you'll just be fine, and you get the great benefits of dairy because it's a lactose-free dairy product with high protein, and it tastes wonderful.
Wonderful. And I hope this podcast was also wonderful to hear or listen or watch wherever you are, consuming the
Yeah,
content. Thank you so much, Mustafa, for your time. What you're building is giving us a lot of insights into the this industry as well as the markets
yeah.
that you're operating in. And thanks to our listeners for watching this episode. We will be, back with another one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa.